Hi, Ivan. It looks as though you have landed me with a bit of a puzzle. Part is deciphering your enjoyable video, but I think I did okay. Let's see if I can run down what we're talking about and what I think. I shall be referring to my scritchy scratchy, disturbingly looking notes while I go. First things is I want to agree with you about the dodgy utility, I would say the lack of utility in terms like light system, heavy system, crunchy system, a related term, transparent. All of those, let's blowtorch them. I think that they're completely missing the point. I'll even go further and say that what people might think of as simple systems in many cases are actually quite demanding in terms of processing during play. So, all that said, throwing out the general sense that if there's a million tables and a great big book and all this, that it must be all kinds of hard, and that if it's a little slim book with this or that little bit, then it must be easy. All right, throw it all out. That's it. Let's take it to the variables of interest you mentioned in a follow-up email that you had in mind to talk about search and handling time. That's certainly one of the variables. But search and handling time is actually a subset of a larger concept, which is about how we're using the procedures of play in terms of referencing. This is tricky because when I say referencing procedures of play, I'm really talking about the way we feel or know we're supposed to do it. It's not quite the same thing as referencing the text. Sometimes referencing the text counts as doing that. All right, points of contact. How much do you have to do that as part of ordinary play? Keeping in mind that I'm not even really talking about the learning curve. It's related, but imagine that we're past the learning curve. Now the question is, how much reference do we have to do? Partly maybe because even past the learning curve, there are still things that are hard enough that we have to reference in them no matter what, and other things that are textual in use, and so they're supposed to be, referenced as we go. All right, so points of contact. Other things that factor into that or that are composing points of contact in many cases, along with search and handling time, would be, check those notes. Let's see. Yes, of course. What I have often referred to as authorities. Now, often what happens is confusion about authorities leads people to consult either with one another. Now, wait, what does that mean? How does that work? What does that do? Who says? Why does it say? Some of your previous dialogues you've referenced with others seem to tap into that. It's just confusion. It's not a principled discussion, in my view. But that kind of confusion can lead you to trot off to either reference us speaking or to reference a text. Wait a minute, what does it say about alignment? Who does that mean? I can do it, or I can't do it, or I can do it but I get punished, or wait, what does that mean? So when you're confused about what the actual authorities are to do and say what, you find yourself wrestling with points of contact in the sense of confusion, not in the sense of ordinary, okay, now I look it up procedure. Then we also have narration, and I mention this because you talked about a couple of examples, which is really interesting. I keep claiming, and people don't believe me until they see it, that the post-resolution narration is not window dressing on the narration. It is a creative step of its own, and the authorities can shift around it independently of the others, even those about the outcome of whatever was rolled. Great. But how much do you get to say in it? And that often is codified in a point of contact. So critical hit tables, frankly, aren't anything except that exactly. Well, Okay, so we've got points of contact. We've got this huge zoo of things to concern ourselves in it. And then different games have different points of contact and different numbers of them. And that's kind of interesting. Right. Given all that, okay, haha, you dipped into the forge well. Ah, and look what you brought up, wriggling and struggling. And the first imp that you brought up in the bucket said, throw out all those other terms you used to use. They're wrong. Not like the old days, kid. All right, then. We're going to take a look at a couple of other points before I launch into the answer. I don't know if it's the answer. Well, a couple other points, as I say. One of them is that you mentioned some Dungeons and Dragons stuff and kind of rightfully dodged away from it, realizing what an enormous, talk about a zoo of different things to reference and talk about. And I don't mean procedures of play, I mean just which text. Well, let's clarify a couple of interesting points. I fully agree with you that Dungeons and Dragons in use per table, and I would say pretty much per almost any version of the game, almost, that it's incredibly slim. And if you go back to sort of my favored zone, which is the late 70s, it is super slim. I mean, anybody picking that up, if they were to read it de novo and kind of, as some games have done recently, take that rule set and kind of scrub it a little bit and make it a nice little readable essay procedure manual. And you can do that with Holmes, which is a nice little procedure manual. It's little. I mean, if somebody would say, this system light abstract piece of shit, who plays that? We need detail. D&D is about realism and detail. What is this nonsense? All right, well, you knew that. Then why do people have issues with it in terms of a high points of contact game? Here we're talking about learning and texts, and frankly, texts that have problems and render the game high contact. And especially in terms of throwing stuff in through multiple contributors and multiple needs. The editorial and authorial mess of TSR between the, say, 1976 and 1985, the more I learn, the more it terrifies me. The only thing I can say is that a ton of stuff got hammered into between two covers multiple times, just getting it in. And I'll specifically point to the DM Guide of 1979. But, it's just like grabbing stuff off the shelves and throwing it in. It's amazing that it's as coherent as it is in many places, but again, I would say in many places. So just using the thing requires immense points of contact. Note too the disconnect between habits of play, how you learned how to play, what you know play is, and then somebody references the book and you're like, wait, flip, that can't be right. So D&D is a very interesting case in this regard. Slim game for a great deal of its versions and big ol' honkin' sets of things. Encounter tables are a great example. Do you use them or not? If you do, then they are a formal point of contact to use. If you don't, then they're just inspiration lists, kind of musing about the fantasy world as you run your eyes up and down what lives in these mountains. And that's it. Not point of contact at all during play. Okay, what next? Notes. Note check. Possibly a child interruption too. I can hear that coming. Saw that coming. I want to, just take a weapon and employ it freely toward this simulationism, narrativism talk that you were kind of diverged off into. And the reason for that is because having lots and lots of things to look up isn't a definition of a purpose of play. And so I want to just get that out of there and move on to other things. I'll refer to a couple of videos and stuff to see what I think about those points later. All right then, where were we? Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. You used a fine phrase, much more hip than my phrases, grokking the fullness of play, which is to say, once you have it working and once you know the procedures and once you're looking up stuff only because it's part of play to look it up, not because you're confused, once you're in that zone of understanding and doing it, then what's the point? It's like that Matt Groening joke from Life in Hell. You're tolerably good at what you do, and now you have to decide whether it's worth doing. Well, in this case, I have talked a great deal this last year, especially, about how a game pays off, and I'm going to just use that terrible phrase and keep it as vague as it needs to be, in terms of when things change fictionally, how did they change, and are we validated both in the coolness and the satisfaction or the catharsis or whatever it may be of that change, plus our sense of agency and gladness that we used those procedures to do it. So that was a mouthful. And if anyone says, everybody knows that, no, they don't. Now we're going to take a look at, that said, this purpose of play, which is my phrase for it, less hip. That said, now let's take a look at one of the hugest points, which is that if the procedures of play serve the changes in the fiction such that we love the changes in the fiction, perhaps with grief and rage as well as joy and happiness, who knows. And we're glad we used these procedures with these people to do it. Then we perceive the game as transparent. We perceive it as light. We perceive it as easy. And at that point, one looks at any number of game texts, of which I can point to many examples, and says, what's that shit doing in there next to the things that we were doing? And I'm not talking about stuff that some other group might have adopted so that you kicked this rulebook's tires this way and it works for you and it all seems very easy and functional to you now. And then some other group comes along and kicks the rulebook's tires in a slightly different way, and they are having a good time, but they're using those pages and you're not, and they're not using those pages and you are. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about stuff in there which no one on this green earth could possibly imagine wanting to have for purposes of play in this game. And I think there are plenty. And I know that's saying a lot. How can you presume to know what I think? Oh, fuck off. There are plenty of texts that do that. And what's going on with that? Well, we've talked a little bit in the past. Some of those personal or dodgy videos, the ones that I don't really want to throw out there for the world to see, that I have behind the wall at the Patreon. One of them was addressed to you. As you recall, I'm referencing that one now. And I was talking about publishing. And I was saying people throw shit into published objects because they're careless, because they don't care, which is slightly different, because they're strapped due to deadlines or whatever, or because they're confused. And one of the big confusions is saying, or somebody on the team or someone editorial or whoever is saying, you have to have that in there. And and it's just not a role-playing game. They know, the retailer isn't going to read the game, but they are going to flip through it just for, see if it looks like a role-playing game. And when they pass that little section with that list that looks like the list of those things, then they go, oh, it's a role-playing game. Okay, So you have to have it in there. Other things, your friend who says, got to have those vehicle movement rules in there. Yeah, you do if you're playing Auto Duel Champions. I'm all for the vehicle rules in such a game. Macho Women with Guns, great example of. I want the movement rules. I really do. Hexes, facing, speed. Other games? No. But the friend says you have to have them in there, and in they go. So all sorts of things get in there so that you are looking at a WOD, not a text. You're looking at a mess, not a manual. You're looking at product, but not, speaking of it as an object, a game. That's all there is to it. We don't have to think of this as game design because it's not game design. And sort of solves that problem of, well, how do we talk about a game that's like that? That you're not talking about a game. You have to talk about the game you actually play when you sit down and play something that's nominally those words in the title, but is your thing. And then we have to look at that and say, okay, what are the points of contact there? Cool though, right? There's no such thing as too little or too many points of contact. There is such a thing as wanting points of contact that are procedural and fun rather than confusion-based. That this is just murky and confusing, so we've got to go look it up every time. That's not the kind of point of contact we want. But there are plenty of games with a hell of a lot of points of contact that are wonderfully fun, easy, doable in play. And conversely, as you alluded to quite rightly, there are plenty of games for which it looks slim. It looks one roll for this all the time. It looks all kinds of easy. But you find yourself fucking with it over and over again, referencing among yourselves or to the text, saying, how do we do that? What does that mean? Or playing to kind of grapple your way through the confusion of it, which of course is deeply unfun. And it may be very arresting, in the moment, and you're kind of like, feel like you're in it and all the rest of it, but ultimately you were grappling with what you could and couldn't, or would or wouldn't, or should or shouldn't do, and not sure how, or what to do. So plenty games, real slim, have all the, as the modern terminology would have it, have all the indie cred that you could possibly imagine. And I will tell you this, at the Forge, I remember games like that, and we took freaking meat mallets to them. Just as you might to a game full of tables and lists and look it ups and roll for this and that and all sorts of things, because a game like that, which served its purpose well and those procedures worked toward it, is better than a game with lots of little, pithy one-liners about how hip it is, and then one roll that you use for everything. It's easy. Pick this, column A, column B, you got this one roll and check it out. Okay, we're done. We're ready. You know what? That game can be full of negative points of contact of all kinds. And that is a real problem. Get rid of the notion of complex versus simple game and start talking about good design, good presentation, effective play. With that kind of agency in particular that you were talking about. We can have agencies about different things. I could even be playing a game where 75% of my character's agency rests in others' hands, but I know where those 75% are and where my 25% is. All of those are what make a game good. So, there go my thoughts. And thanks for the crazy video of inquiry, and I will talk to you later.